Exceptional Radio.
Hey, it's Sunday. Sunday, live from Sunroom Studios Base Capsule. Let's get ready for thrills, chills, and bone-crunching rumors. I don't know. There's no monster truck rally.
Random. Exceptional Radio.
So, on the note of that rumors, have you seen the Jamie Foxx saga?
Oh man, like he suffered a massive stroke and he's like paralyzed and people are trying to blame it on a vaccine. That's what I've heard or read.
Meanwhile, he's actually out playing pickleball.
Whoa! So they Steve Harvey'd his ass.
Well, it's funny in terms of like, there was a bunch of right-wing media outlets that ran with the story. Like when it first started going down, he was like, staying quiet about it and not releasing anything to the public. And then eventually his daughter came out and was like, yeah, he's playing pickleball. All this stuff you're reading is fake. Don't believe everything you read. And then it came out like 2 weeks later, somebody, I forget the lady's name because she's just some rando. But she was claiming that insiders told her that he was partially blind because of the vaccine, which is like 1,000% unconfirmed, and basically they had to redact it in a few outlets that.
So every outlet basically became a tabloid.
1,000%. Yeah.
for as short a period of time as like a couple hours, and as long as however many days it's been until it was revealed.
Well, I think most news in America is either propaganda or tabloid at this point in terms of how they report things, because it's either completely just repeating what was said, which is propagandistic, depending on who's like saying things, and when they like are just repeating police bullshit, it's 1,000% propaganda. But then there's this like rush to be first, which then ends up getting a lot of misinformation out there, which then becomes the tabloid. So they don't actually care about the integrity of the information as long as they're first.
Man, how many times do we have to remind the internet that the rush to be first is this folly of institutions? It's like every couple of months, like something happens and everyone's reminded, oh yeah, we have to fact check, we have to check our sources. And then everyone gets back on that for like 2 or 3 months, and then some idiot comes along and didn't check their sources, like that attorney that decided to ask ChatGPT for some legal precedent, and it generated fake legal precedent.
So I feel like we are about 3 disasters away from the AI hype train derailing, in terms of like, that wasn't a huge one. But as soon as somebody does something at scale that ends up giving AI a bad name, that's like they thought they were doing something good, but then it turned bad. It's like 3 events away from like the AI hype train just completely being over. Because then I was thinking about it in terms of like the tech bro, Messiah storyline is kind of fading, and I think people are not inclined to believe that capitalism's trying to save their lives anymore. Whereas like 30 years ago, I feel like people believed capitalism was trying to provide a solution to problems. Whereas like now everybody really understands, like, oh, if there's a problem and I monetize it, I'm not trying to actually solve that problem. I'm just trying to make money off that problem.
I think even back in high school, I was asking the question, well, if the market is supposed to, correct and fix things, right? Like when it's working, right? That's what it's supposed to do. And I always got the answer, well, yeah, if everything's functioning properly, then the market and capitalism takes care of the system itself. And to a lesser extent it does, but it also it also seems to have built-in failure points that allow for a lot of disparity to emerge. And it always seemed like the answer I got was counter to my question. My question really is like, I should have just been more forward. It's like, well, if it's if it's supposed to work, then why aren't the roads fixed, or why is the infrastructure failing, or why is education being defunded, or why is healthcare, or insurance, like, impossible to navigate, or any of those questions?
Well, it's because it's being framed in the incorrect way in terms of like capitalism versus any other ism as a system of economics, when in reality it's extractive economics versus regenerative economics. And I just recently read a paper about this in terms of like extractive economics have obviously been how things have been operating since the Industrial Revolution. But in terms of like other countries have been able to implement regenerative economics in a way that it's like the fundamental problem with the way we have extractive economics operating in America specifically is that it doesn't give weight to the necessity of a long-term consumer as being part of the process, as like necessary as being as necessary as the producer. Because the issue is you can produce the most amazing thing in capitalism, but if there's no consumers, then it's not going to actually produce a profit. So it's like you actually really need consumers in capitalism to function as a system. Is most specifically in extractive economics. But that's the problem. Extractive doesn't care about the long term, which is why regenerative is meant to focus on the understanding that you need to have a balance between short-term profits and long-term capacity to have someone who's actually purchasing or using a product in a way that makes the producer valuable. And this is like the framing that we're not getting in America, because it's still stuck in the like 70-year-old, 80-year-old fucking capitalism versus communism, which is completely it's like nonsense words at this point, but they're completely unrepresentative of the underlying principles that are really driving these economies, which is why when we look at like the American economy as being extractive and not regenerative, it's very clear as to why it's like it can't survive much longer.
Are those
in this
kind
form.
of economies even compatible? Like long term?
I mean, it depends. It really
how
depends
long can a
on
regenerative
what
economy
exist.
exist?
This is the issue. An extractive economy can exist as long as a regenerative economy is
Stable?
available and stable, but larger. Because the issue is extractive
It's always
need
consuming.
regenerative.
Yeah.
Yes, and otherwise, like if the extractive becomes too large, then the regenerative economies can't sustain what extractive economies need, which is why it's like an extractive economy can look like it will work until they've extracted from everything, i.e., if you're a general that only, this is where Sun Tzu's fucking half-baked philosophy only works to a certain degree in terms of like, once you attack all of the fucking bases, you have to start making your own product. Otherwise, there's nothing left to attack, and you're gonna eventually die. And there's an element of like, it's in there, but it's not stressed enough to offset the invincible general approach of like, it's easier to attack an undefended base and take their resources. Yeah, that's true, but you can only do that so many times as a strategy. And if you do that too much, then you're going to lose how to produce and not be able to make that transition, which is what happened. So I think there's this element of like repeatedly
There's got to be
in
something wrong with
history.
the way that like economics is framed.
Well, it's too philosophies have to be presented in the most extreme, abstract, absolute form to represent what the possibilities could be, which then makes it difficult to discuss
But that requires
the
like the ability to abstract concepts.
but then it obscures the like the pragmatic tangibles that could be available in between the extremes. So I think it's like people get wrapped up in the extremes because it's
That's how it's framed.
well, but it's impossible to discuss the median without it framing the extremes. So
Yeah,
again, it's
yeah.
like you can't get to a point where you're talking about where is the median between the extremes unless you frame the extremes. So then inherently it becomes like a problem of getting people's attention back, which is what this is the exact problem that Karl Marx had. And when you look at and you actually read Karl Marx, it's like him outlining the extremes is not the ultimate point. It's like part of him getting to what the median would be or the utopian form would be, but people get so heavily focused on the extremes that they miss the larger point, which is I think again it's like human nature when discussing things that are heavily it's like okay, it's impossible to discuss things in human nature without emotion being involved, but there's an obsession with appearing objective and emotionally detached from perspective, so that inherently is a conflict in discussing
Like,
philosophical frameworks in terms of like trying to present them as being logical.
but that would only work if one was completely uninvolved.
But that's the inherent human
And you
condition that
can't do
one
that
has to
though.
understand is the paradox of why we have to learn logical frameworks to overcome what become emotionally um, prompted actions or thoughts, and determining when those emotional actions or thoughts are out of line with probability or with what we have deemed as civil. And this is where
As soon as
the
somebody
notion,
reads some information, now they're involved. They're no
well,
longer
that's what that
objective.
okay, what you're saying is exactly why um the most far right extreme Christians don't want anybody to read anything besides the Bible,
Oh
because to
man.
them that's exactly why, because reading means that you involuntarily take that thing into your being and you have no control of it, which is why those people are projecting their inability to control their emotions on everybody else.
Yeah.
It's like they can't control their emotions, they can't control with what they take in terms of like, oh, you see this thing, you want to do it. They think everybody else has that impulse control problem, so they assume that everybody else needs the same uh lack of access to different ideas to not act out things. Whereas if you look at reality, most people who play video games do not do the things, if not just because the things that they do in video games are physically impossible, but the fact that most people who play first person shooters are not going out and shooting people. It's not in line with the reality that these people are projecting, because they have a problem understanding everybody doesn't act like them, because they think the world, these are the fucking same goddamn people that thought the literal universe revolved around us and them specifically. So they haven't changed their fucking perspective for like 1,500 years or however long the fuck it's been, like since heliospheric perspective or
Heliocentric.
geocentric, because not even helio, yeah, it's not even the fucking sun, it's fucking Earth. They thought was the goddamn center of the universe. And it's like heliospheric just sounds slightly less narcissistic than the geocentric, which is why I'm like, knowing that these people have been obsessed with thinking they're the fucking center of the universe for this long, it's like that's why we can't take them seriously in the modern context, because they haven't even changed their fucking mindset for like over 1,000 years.
Man, I wonder
It's
how
like,
many.
no, everything's about us. Everything, we're the center of
I
everything.
wonder how many people who would like have a mind-blowing experience when they realize that tides don't actually exist. That there's a fixed point of water that's being pulled towards the sun that the Earth rotates through, and that there's another point of water that's being pulled towards the moon that does rotate around like very slowly, but it's not actually like always on the opposite side of the sun. It's wherever the moon is. And so
It's an effect,
yeah,
not a cause.
and so once a month we get this double high tide because the moon and the sun are on the same side of the Earth. And the Earth is rotating through this extra dense portion or extra large mass of water, this volume of water. It's not it's not that the water's like rushing around and building up in areas and swooping back around and filling up a bay here and a cove there and then rushing across the seabed, across an entire ocean to the other side of the Earth. That's not how that actually works. We're flowing through it. We're flowing through the atmosphere. The Earth is rotating through atmosphere. Like, in Indiana, we're traveling like, I think, like 700 miles an hour. And at the equator, it's like a little bit faster than that. And it's a bit slower at the poles. But we're moving through space really fucking fast. We don't even appreciate that. But everything's framed from, our perspective. On the ground, miles per hour. Forget how fast the Earth is rotating relative to the sun, or traveling relative to the sun, which is incredibly fast as well. No, it's in some weird relative speed that we reflect upon. And I think that's for like the lowest common denominator, because it's easier to explain the concept as, oh yeah, you are traveling X feet per second, versus yeah, you're traveling like X miles per second. Relative to the sun. I think a lot of things are for the sake of not having to explain complex concepts to people that may never fully digest that kind of information.
Well, and in that same vein, it's like telling someone that gravity doesn't exist as a force, but it exists as a result of forces acting upon each other. It sounds like a nonsensical, pedantic distinction, but it makes all the difference.
Well,
And I
if
think
someone can't
that's-
wrap their head around that, then they're not ready for actual physics.
Right. But even physics wasn't ready for it up until, like 70 years ago.
Yeah, it's true.
So that's where it's like, it's funny. Not funny. It's
Well, I
like,
wasn't around 70 years ago, so to me, that's always been the case. But
well,
yeah, no, you're
okay,
right. You're right.
This is like, it's weird when humanity itself is not prepared for certain bits of information. And then once humanity gets those bits of information, everyone benefits in a way that only the smartest people can take advantage at the time of transition, but then it trickles down. So like, for example, when they learned about the second stage of photosynthesis in plants, it's something where at that point, every person who grew plants benefited from it, but it was like at that stage of humanity, we weren't ready to like get plants to they're probably not in their final stage of how they could benefit us, but in terms of like, there were certain things that we weren't ready to do, or at least in our modern lineage of recorded history, that then once that hit, then it opened up this whole new line of things like grafting, in terms of like, I think the last I read, they were able to graft like 40 different plants into 40 different plant traits into one plant that exuded all 40 of those traits. So that's where I'm like, it's probably way higher by now, but you would never have been able to do that until the photosynthesis, and then by proxy, like the genome project in terms of like being able to not just look at human but plant genetics and their history and how things are expressed. There's all these things that had to happen to then get to a point to understand how to graft plants in a way that not only worked to let them survive, but to still retain the traits of the plant that was being grafted to the new chimera. And that's where I'm like, there's these things in lore, there's chimeras all through lore, but it took a while for us to actually be able to get to making them in real life, in a way that again, at least in our modern lineage of recorded history, like the way that they're explained in the quote unquote myths of history, like, man, maybe they figured it out 80,000 years ago and then it got lost and then we had to figure it out again, which is very possible, which is why I think the like ancient alien stuff is just fucking absurd in terms of like, it doesn't follow Occam's razor. It's like Occam's razor would dictate that we developed that shit and then like lost the lineage before it was extraterrestrials. Like if we develop something now, Occam's razor would deem that we would have developed it before fucking aliens brought it to us. That is like such a stretch of reality that doesn't make any sense. And when you just know a little bit about fucking science, it's not the extraterrestrials. They definitely exist somewhere, not in the form that our science fiction necessarily has presented, but it's fucking impossible for them not to. But for them to have come here is just so so far-fetched for so many reasons that getting to the point of like making it seem like they came here a long time ago and like just disappeared and left no tangible trace in that's not in fucking stone or some like ancient form of like recording things. It's just nonsensical to the point of like I can believe it, but the idea of ancient aliens getting like 15 seasons is like so far from science.
I think those kinds of ideas appeal to people who have limited intellectual capacity, who come up to like the brick wall of like a pyramid and like, well, how the fuck did they build that? How did they move those stones? There's no way they could have moved those stones. I mean, other than, applied physics. but when someone hits that brick wall, they're gonna assume like, well, obviously some superior intelligence did this because, obviously I'm the smartest person on Earth. Everyone else can't be possibly smarter than me. Einstein was a joke, and so to that kind of person who won't like even entertain the idea that there are other humans who could math more successfully than they can, they'll buy something like that wholehearted. They'll just go all in. It's like, oh yeah, that's the best explanation ever. Aliens, fucking aliens, that didn't eat us or kill us or just wipe us out and take all the resources of the planet because they came from a different solar system, maybe even a different galaxy. Why wouldn't they just take the resources?
Well, and that's where again, like, the idea of alien intergalactic species operating on Sun Tzu principles is like such a narcissistic perspective on intergalactic civilization that it's like it's so absurd that like the notion of something that would be able to get between stars or galaxies is like going to find resources. It's so absurd. That notion is like it's like fundamentally incompatible.
No,
I'm like
that intergalactic species, they wouldn't even need to come close to our planet or our solar system. They would just absorb the energy of our solar system from light years away. We wouldn't even know it's happening until poof, we're all gone.
I mean, what? Look, there's okay. Anything that's using matter to get through the universe is not getting far.
No.
this is what my point is in terms of like,
There's just
if
not enough
there's
energy
90,
in it.
no, is there's 96% of what we're in is antimatter slash dark matter. The thing that's using the 4% is not getting far.
Yeah.
It's not getting through that 96%. So this is where I'm like, the thing that depends on the 4% of the universe is exploring 4% of the universe, just mathematically. The thing that depends on the 96% is the thing that's actually going to get through the 96%. So like us existing in that 4% don't have to worry about the thing that can explore the 96% because they're not even using the same fucking materials we are.
Yeah.
And that's where I mean, like, fundamentally, the notion of the thing that can traverse that 96% needing our 4% is a flawed way of viewing this 100%. And it's like, realistically,
Space
that
aliens came
thing-
here for our weed, man.
Right, like they came here for our fucking gold. They came
They-
thousands and millions of light years
For
to
Earth
steal
gold.
our gold and our oil
They want
Like,
specifically
wait,
Earth
what?
gold and Earth oil because
and our photons from our sun because they have a yellow sun and ours is like it turns red at the right. And it's like,
ours
hold
is
up.
no, I mean our sun is mostly emits mostly in the green spectrum. It's really weird. Our atmosphere filters out so much green light that we think that light is white and blue. That sunsets are red and the sun is orange, but really the sun's like Kelvin temperature is very distinctly green, like emerald green. We can't see it, of course, because our eyes won't allow it. We're not in space.
Yeah, it's really crazy how our spectrum is limited versus what actually exists.
I mean, it means that we're actually not nearly as green sensitive as we are, and we see green. We see almost all of the detail comes from like green light. It's crazy. Like we don't. It's so difficult to appreciate some of the concepts of physics because it puts like temperature. Fuck. We're like what the average temperature is something like 300 degrees Kelvin or something like that. I don't know what Google says it is right now. They'll tell me. 301 degrees Kelvin right now. So that sounds hot as hell. But it's really comfortable. I'm wearing t-shirt and shorts. No air conditioning.
There's things like the uncertainty principle that are so rooted in narcissism that I'm like, oh, that shit is nonsense. That shit makes no fucking sense. You're telling me that the universe operates on the whims of what man believes their choices can be and not actually what's physically possible? Not buying it. Sorry.
Yeah, our exceptionally limited and like infantile understanding of physics in the grand scheme of the universe, like billions upon billions of years versus how 10,000 years of potential development towards where we are now in terms of understanding physics, and really all of that's happened in the last 100 years.
This is not to say that like a multiverse or some sort of like parallel universe wouldn't exist or couldn't exist. It's more so the way that they're framing it is like, oh, if you like went to Harvard versus if you went to no college at all or something versus where you are. And it's like, no, that's like, to me, those types of choices are so inconsequential in the grand scheme of like the universe that it would be so fucking stupid for the universe to have like segmentation off of individuals' choices rather than like the actual possible position of atoms at any given moment, which is like, well, yeah, of course. But it's like the notion that everybody has the capacity to move in like all these infinite positions at any given moment is then a fundamental misunderstanding of how energy works, because it's like you're only still able to do like what your body can do. Like you can't just suddenly like fly in one universe because that's the and it's like the way that science fiction has then conflated narcissistic perspective of the universe with like actual principles of physics in terms of like the way that they were framing string theory and like multiverse principle. Of course it makes way more sense when you like read the scientific explanations and then what they're saying versus like the sci-fi interpretations of that became. And it's like even down to like the Terrans in Star Trek where it's like, oh, everybody's just evil. It's like that's a really basic way of breaking down. I guess that's like for a very media illiterate or scientific illiterate society, that's a good way to introduce the concept. But even to the point that like they were trying to represent these concepts but then just made them about like human emotion effectively or human expression of emotion, and in terms of like how a society would structure if it was just like based on a different emotion, mostly anger, which it still kind of is. We just repress it most of the time, and then the wars pop up when it's no longer able to be repressed. So we try to act like we're not dictated by anger, but it's just because we are able to like generally repress it most of the time. So this notion of like the universe then at scale being a slave to our emotion is like the most insane type of projection, where I'm like, okay, if they were doing this as a metaphor to be like tongue in cheek, oh, look at the human condition where we are slave to emotion and like we have to control it. Ha ha ha, look at that. But no, it's like then it became a trope in science fiction for like all the metaverses to be broken down based on individuals' decisions. So then the point of like, oh, in one multiverse, Stephen Strange became like a tennis player and he didn't become a surgeon. Well, that's fucking stupid. That's really fucking stupid. If this is gonna be how we're like presenting multiverses in media, because that is very homocentric to the point that it doesn't even then give the weight or possibility that the aliens on different planets decisions are influencing the multiverses in a way where I'm like, eventually they get there when they start to run out of stories around humans, but they center the multiverses so much around humans that it just like, it's hard. As someone who loves science and science fiction, it's hard for me to accept poorly conceived sci-fi that like leans on tired tropes that haven't been re-examined in the proper way, in terms of like we need to put that multiverse shit to bed in terms of like it being based around human decisions, or like even the Infinite Crisis in DC where they like have it reset where it's like all about the different hero. That's still fucking stupid. It's like really, and the reason I say this is because I've seen in No Man's Sky where like there's planets where everything is like crystalline and the animals are crystalline, and like everything is not a biped or framed from like a mammalian, reptilian, fungal perspective in terms of how life emerges. And I feel like sci-fi has very much been it's been limited by the biped framework being the prominent framework through which it like frames multiverses. And that's where like, oh, everything or everywhere all at once, hot dog hands. It's like that shit is so fucking stupid when you like think about it. But when society is like so starved for actual like creative like expressions of what other universes could possibly be, that's like mind blowing. And that's where I'm like, I'm not blaming everything everywhere all at once for the hot dog hands. It's more so society is so mentally stunted that it's like, oh, if in this universe you got hot dog fingers, it's like, Really? Is this like how we're gonna limit ourselves in imagining different universes? Because if that's the case, we've like gone on some weird um
If this is a detour, I want off because
yeah. Well, it's definitely like, I mean, it's already coming to an end in terms of like you see the reboots and the like franchises like Fast X. Now it's a trilogy, and now we're gonna do another Hobbs. And it's like they've clearly run out of new ideas on this side of the pond. Where I'm like, what are they gonna do once it's like clear that they've hit the bottom of that well of like we've done Back to the Future remakes 7 times now. What else do we do? And it's like that shit is gonna happen sooner than people think. And
well,
I don't think.
I think the same
Sorry, go
thing that
ahead.
happened in the early 2000s. We're going to get a bunch of remakes of Korean and Japanese horror movies
Right.
and science fiction, and but they're going to start adding Chinese stories to it now because the Chinese cinema has entered into the collective awareness. And then same with Indian cinema. We're going to see Americanized versions of those stories, and it'll be far enough into the future. I'm going to say 20 years, 15 to 20 years, just long enough for people to forget about cultural appropriation. um, let's see. I'm trying to keep my cynicism index down, but it's hard because in the midst of a writer's strike where the immediate response is to attempt to resuscitate shows like The Fonz, which
Oh god.
I mean I know who The Fonz is, but I doubt very many people who are say maybe like 5 to 10 years younger than me actually watched the show that he was on. Because I don't think they would have been into that
Is
kind
that
of
really
thing.
happening?
Dude, there are so many ancient, dude, Hanna-Barbera. The entire catalog of Hanna-Barbera was released to the on whatchamacallit, my favorite streaming site, because CBS and ABC and NBC and Fox, they're all embroiled in the writers' strike, and so they don't have any new shows to develop. They don't have any new episodes of their existing shows. The movie industry is writing out the last of the movies that had already gotten the green light for production, and it's already begun. Like this, there are numerous shows that do like a 3 or 4 episodes on, and then or maybe 5 or 6 episodes on, and then they take a 3 month break, and then they release the same number of episodes, and they do that 4 times a year for the entire year for a season, and that's not going to happen with a bunch of shows now because they stopped writing. Because so much of that writing hinges upon like rating samplings. Because if the characters aren't tracking, the storyline isn't getting the attention it should, those storylines get clipped. Those characters get put somewhere else. And my understanding is that the writers themselves are doing what amounts to like creative gymnastics to fulfill the demands of committees of people who aren't writers, and that's taxing because they're not getting compensated for this kind of effort or productivity. And the people who are making money hand over fist are just sitting back and not even watching those shows. They're just collecting a check and going out and blowing up the engine of their new car, or sinking their boat because they went out during the wrong tide. And so we're about to see a really dark period in visual entertainment. It's going to be reality shows and talk shows, things that don't rely on any scripting. It might actually mean the talk shows are going to become more interesting because they won't have any scripting, and it'll reveal which talk show hosts are actually funny, who could actually carry on conversations, and who can actually bring on guests who can create an interesting dialogue. And we're going to find out really quickly who relies on advertising and is really just becoming a YouTube channel. Everything's gonna be
And
commercials. Fuck.
YouTube is really bad about that anymore.
Oh no, I just painted the word. Man, I just realized everything I just said leads to a world where all TV is basically just commercials.
Which that's what the future of cyberpunk was trying to warn about, not to like warn or usher that in.
Yeah.
And it's like all these people who love cyberpunk, they're fucking weird to me, man. It's like I feel like they
Well,
don't understand humanity, and they're trying to get us to the worst possible future because they think it looks cool because of the neon lights and shit. And it's like those people who fundamentally misunderstood the
Yeah.
message of what cyberpunk was like saying.
I think for one to truly understand and yeah, and to truly understand what cyberpunk literature was trying to do, one would actually have to wholesale reject, a lot of technology, or the utilization of technology in certain ways, because what we've ended up with is the embrace of a commercialized version of cyberpunk. It's it's not cyberpunk. It just looks like all of the trappings. It looks like Blade Runner, but it's missing the critical, like, dark factor of, yeah, we don't want this. Like, Blade Runner is supposed to make one's butthole clench up and say, holy shit, there are replicants everywhere. Like, what?
Well, and Harrison Ford finally confirmed that Deckard was a replicant. So
Yeah.
it's like there's no more question about that.
I mean,
So it's like
Ridley Scott said so much too years ago as well. So I guess Harrison Ford is like the final word on it.
because he had been pushing back on it
Yeah.
in terms of like they took out the clarity to make it a question, and now because people were so obsessed with answering questions that were meant to be ambiguous for a statement, now they've got their answer, and it's not the one that people wanted. In terms of like, if he's a replicant that doesn't know he's a replicant, that's not a good future. That's
Nope.
not a good future. So it's like the idea that like then he was able to get around the 3-year limitation on their lifespan and like produce offspring with another replicant. That's where it's like, oh, they're a miracle born out of tragedy. That's still not a great, like, that's like the rose that grew through the crack in the concrete. It's not meant to be like rainbows and fucking roses. It's like, yeah, it overcame this horrible tragedy. That's good, but it doesn't negate all of the fucking concrete tragedy that's being portrayed in the process.
I think
those people miss that.
I
for
think
some
anyone
reason.
who misidentifies the Blade Runner universe as anything other than like a horror story is completely missing the point. I mean, it's the world that gives us Wayland Yutani and and Wayland Corp. This is like the worst future imaginable. A corporation that creates replicants that end up killing people that don't know they're replicants, and another that is engaged in bioengineering of weapons that they can't even control. CEOs living forever. These are like the most terrifying like concepts that I think it'd be cool to live forever if someone is like mentally resilient enough to withstand watching everyone they know die and watching everything they've ever seen change and eventually be turned into dust. But not if it means being an executive for a multinational. Also, like I've joked about like, yeah, give me cyborg implants, but realistically, I don't want cyborg implants. I don't want to be connected to a computer network. I don't want electrodes in my brain, and like what's it, the Neuralink apparently they're a few signatures away from the first stages of human testing or something like that. I think Elon should be the first test subject at all stages.
Well, it's funny. I see what's happening in terms of like what rich people want to do with information. And it's like they want information to behave the same way capital behaves. And that's not going to happen. And what's funny about it is it ends up taking way too much capital to try to get digital information to behave like physical information in a way that it's unsustainable, but they've put so much money in to try to make the digital world succumb to feudalism that they think that it's possible at this point, but it's only because they don't want to succumb to the sunk cost fallacy and like end up like cutting on something that they think they could accomplish just because the cost is too high or so far too high. And that's where I think like we saw it with Bitcoin and NFTs, which have Bitcoin's not disappeared, but as far as like in the public conversation, it might as well have disappeared completely. Same NFTs are completely gone. But ultimately, what those things were trying to do is use.
The last time I saw anything about an NFT, it was about Cheeto Mussolini's NFT superhero cards, and they showed him playing a guitar that had,
which failed miserably.
Yeah,
but it had hardware
that couldn't have existed ever. It was like clearly an AI thing because whoever rendered it didn't know enough to make any of the things in the image look realistic, of course. And I saw this on a Guitar World website, and of course, Guitar World's comment section is teenagers, and they were just vicious.
I'm pretty sure that was last year. Even I don't think that was even 2023.
I think that was the last time I read anything about an NFT. That was.
But again, it's like they put so much effort into trying to introduce this notion of digital rarity into like when people think, even if like the people who owned the NFTs didn't actually own the legal right to the image in the first place, the people who then came in and were right-clicking it were just exercising the way digital things work, thinking that they're like stealing people's NFTs. So that concept was like dead on arrival because digital information is going to behave the way digital information is going to behave. And they just could not hash their way into making people not able to like right click copy images. Like you just can't. So the notion of like what they thought that they were doing and what they were actually doing being incongruent then makes it so like the next time and the next time after that they try to do it, it's like even less likely that they're going to be able to understand how to make digital information behave the way, like, for example, putting the AI stuff behind paywalls in order to then sort of quote unquote monetize it. It's like, well, if you make this thing publicly available as free and then try to monetize it as a way to then make people or organizations think that they're going to replace their workers, then you just immediately undermine your entire point by putting a price tag on it. So it's not going to be like, even if it's like in like,
even if I can code my own interface and access their API myself, because it's an open API.
Even if it's only a penny a month, the notion of then having to pay that penny a month and then go in and do the extra work of the prompts, it's going to be so like inhibitive.
I have way more important things to do than like.
Exactly. Everybody does, especially executives. So they're not actually going to transition to that tech in the way that it's being framed, because it's actually going to take way too much time to overcome that hurdle of switching. Then it's like they're proposing that as like, oh, we're going to save money switching to AI, but then when they actually try to make the switch, they're gonna have to spend money to make the switch, and then they're gonna be like, actually, no, you know what? We're just gonna keep doing what we already do.
Yeah, so
And
like the
so
idea
many
of
companies are gonna do that.
I'm not trying to learn a brand new workflow to save myself a few seconds on every hour. I just don't see that as being beneficial. Entering a string of prompts over and over again until it starts to look right doesn't seem like a. That just seems like a throwing shit at a wall to see what sticks method of creating things.
It's exactly what it seems like when you're able to just do the thing
Yeah.
the first time and not have to like worry if it got the prompt right. And so
I
the
have
notion
advanced
of
tools
like,
that can do what I need them to do, and they do it reliably when I tell them to do because the software isn't trying to think for me.
you know what's hilarious is like we already have a precedent in this in website makers, and I can like attest to the notion of like people are still hiring website designers in 2023 because the website makers are slightly too obtuse for a regular person that's going to make a website. So they'll think that they can just use Wix or use some like website designer. And then they go in and all of the different options are overwhelming. And then they're like, fuck, I have no idea what I'm doing. And then they go hire somebody to do the website, just like they should have done in the first place.
Yeah.
But these things are being sold as if it like lowers the
Well,
in reality
it's
like
one thing to have the tools. It's another thing to know how to use them, and then it's another thing to have like actual to understand design principles, and and user interface design principles. Because if you don't understand how to design a user interface, or you don't understand the most basic elements of design, then having all the tools in the world is useless. It doesn't matter how many tools. I mean, I suppose that somebody could like smash the keys and swing the mouse around for a little while, and they might render something that looks kind of interesting. And there's a potential where there is a person who just like intuitively creates a website without knowing any of that stuff, and they just do it, and it looks really good because they put some thought into it. But I'm pretty sure that that's like. That person doesn't actually exist. And if they did, they existed really young, and then they learned how to use the tools, and they learned design principles and theories.
well, and like you're saying, it's like the tool is useless if you don't know the principles and the theory like to make them useful. And I think that's where like somebody who then knows the principles can use the lowest tool and make something that someone who doesn't know the principles can't make with the best tool. And that's to me, when I was way more into writing music, it was like understanding the principles. It was like, yeah, I was using Reason or something that was like automated, but the only reason I could use those things is because I understood the principles to then in turn make something that
Man, Reason is so cool now. It's
well,
so
the thing
cool
about
now.
it is like, just as an example,
Cubase
if I'm
is so crazy now. I can't even understand half of what's going on in Cubase. Like they
well, but
added
this is
so
the
much
issue.
post-production stuff to Cubase that it's no longer just about making music.
That's what I mean in terms of like, because they do things like that, somebody who then knows about production would be able to use Cubase to then supplement not having to have like a fucking room with a 64 channel mixer or some shit, because Cubase is like giving them the power to transfer that knowledge into software. And it's like, it's not necessarily going to be beneficial to everyone, but the person that knows how to use it would then be able to like transfer their knowledge in a way that then
I think a lot of this
only
stuff
previously hardware was going to be able to
well,
accomplish
like
that.
this. I mean, the stuff that I mean is like they have software that integrates with post-production environments for like Atmos mixing and stuff like that. I don't have a fucking Atmos monitoring setup, so I can't pretend to even approach mixing in Atmos. So there's some aspects of like where the software is gone now that caters to the absolute cutting edge of media production industries, and I think that's really fantastic because there still are DAWs like Ableton or Fruity Loops and Reason and Bitwig that are really music centric. That can be adapted to integrate with production and post production environments. But now I'm like seeing more things like Avid and DaVinci and Adobe's offering, where they're becoming more integrated with at the hardware, like the heavy duty hardware level, and they're taking on a lot of the audio roles that used to be found in music centric device or platforms. And so there's like kind of this cross convergence of capability, but they still have their superpowers. But I think that's the way it should be, because I don't think every musician should also be a movie maker. Just the way that every movie maker can't possibly have time to become a musician also. There's just not enough time. They might be able to do both of them reasonably well, or make movies about music, or make music that goes into movies, but I think it's rare when you find someone like John Carpenter who makes a movie and then also is deeply involved in the composition and production of the soundtracks.
Well, but the issue is like, yeah, somebody who's making movies shouldn't necessarily be making the music, but it's like if somebody's making music, to me, working in like Digital Composer versus Reason, it's like I can make the exact same song in any program. It's just gonna be how long it takes,
Yeah.
and how long it actually takes me to work on the specific sound that I'm trying to do.
Oh yeah,
Whereas
like
Reason,
those things are optimized.
shortcuts.
Yeah, because it's made for making music. That's what its goal
but
is.
The only way you can use the shortcuts is if you know what you're doing. And this
Yeah.
is where I mean, it's the same thing with websites as music, in terms of like those shortcuts are not useful to a novice who doesn't know the long route, because then it's like they don't know what any of those routes mean at all. So they're given the notion that they can get to the endpoint using the shortcuts, but because they don't know any route, they can't use the shortcuts. And I think this is the same shit we're about to have with AI, in terms of like the technology being presented as if the person would then be democratized access into getting to that endpoint without having to learn how to get to that endpoint in the first place. That's almost never true.
I'm
And I
pretty
think
sure
it's
that
really hard for people to acknowledge that that's been promised almost every time a new quote unquote democratizing technology emerges, but that's never what happens.
the reason that I gravitated towards Reason is because of this sucomorphic interface, because it most closely emulated the environment, the studio environment in studio environments that I was familiar with. And so there was almost zero learning curve in terms of signal routing, or when I would create an instrument or an audio track or any of that stuff, once they added the ability to record audio. And since all of the hardware, all of the devices were emulations of some other kind of methodology, not necessarily like a perfect hardware emulation. It was more of like the workflow emulation, because they were trying to emulate the workflow of certain pieces of hardware. A lot of the features were instantly familiar to me. And so a lot of the things that have come about that are really exciting were like, production methodology that became possible as computers became more powerful. I'm not sure how much of that stuff is knowing all of these things. I'm not sure how much all that is necessary to make music now, because I've been using a piece of software for 20 years, and so I can't imagine not having had that software in front of me for the last extended period of time. It's basically always been there. But for somebody who's just decided that they want to make music on a computer, and they find themselves in front of Reason or Fruity Loops, or I guess they call it FL Studio now, or Ableton, that's like a minimum of 40 to 100 hours of tutorials to learn how to use the software. and that's probably approaching it wrong. I kind of believe that one should learn how to use the software by applying the concepts of composition, and then the sounds will emerge as a result of the way the song is being composed. And then when you need it to do something, you learn how to do that thing. But maybe the way that I would approach it takes longer.
Should a person need to know how to set up a rack to be able to write a song?
No,
I don't
God,
necessarily
no.
think so, which is why in terms of like digital composer, you can immediately make output on piano roll notation, whereas with Reason, you can have the templates where it's set up, but in general, like if you don't use a template, you have to set up everything and like
If you just hit the plus button and add instrument and then start playing on the keyboard, assuming the keyboard is is
you have to know
associated
that.
properly,
You have to know that, and you
if the
have to click
preferences
on
are
the
set
right
up.
things.
Yeah.
It doesn't if you don't click on the actual like hardware mimicked interface, it won't necessarily attach to things. So that's where it's like it's supposed to, but there's certain little things that well maybe in the recent ones it like automatically does it.
Oh yeah, no, it's really
At least
automated now. It's so friendly
no,
now.
hold on. But I'm saying if you did not click on the interface in Reason 5 and Reason 6, if you hit add equipment, it wouldn't automatically attach it. You could then click on two things and say connect them. But if you didn't have them highlighted, it wasn't going to
Oh
automatically
yeah.
connect them.
Now
Which
you
is
have
where
to
if you
now you have
highlight
to
them,
hold shift down if you wanted to not connect things when you're adding new stuff. They've made a lot of weird structural changes to how to use it. Like I had a set of stickers for a keyboard for the hotkeys, for a Reason 6.5. That was what I got. That's when I bought the keyboard set, and then with Reason 10, everything changed. So I had to spend another, you know, $15 on stickers in an afternoon, like just making the tips of my fingers just ache. Because even with a razor blade, that stickum is tough stuff. Holy shit. No, no. I mean, I see what you're getting at. Like, I mean, that's kind of where I'm leading it to. Reason has become such a complex piece of software that it's definitely not. It's the kind of thing that needs guidance. A lot of these DAWs used to be simple, but now they need a lot of guidance to get through, just to make work right, to make sound good, and I think that's because those were the things that were possible. Initially, they were only trying to emulate what was possible in a physical realm. But it turns out that in a modeled environment, in a virtualized environment, a lot of things are possible. You can have two rooms in one recording. You can have two physical spaces, the sound of two spaces or more, at different locations in a room on one stereo recording. And so we're no longer limited by the shape of the room or the space that we're in, or even the instruments. The instruments don't even exist anymore. They're just ideas now that turn into sounds.
well, and on that note, like an 808 bass noise isn't really possible from like a non-digital instrument.
Not the
So
one, not the one that everyone thinks is an 808.
right, exactly.
A
And that's
real
what, again,
808
it's
is
like
so weak sounding. It's
I mean, but even then, it's still a digital instrument, even though it's analog. It's using manipulation of electronic
oh yeah,
waves
yeah.
and not like you can't find an acoustic 808.
Yeah, no, it's
You know what I mean?
it's
There's no such thing.
it's an electroacoustic device because it relies on voltage switching. So on some really discrete level,
Yeah.
because the voltage levels are actually what's creating the sound, because it's an oscillator relying on voltage. It could be quantified digitally very easily, because it probably only requires something dumb like 10 bits to quantify like an OG 808 sound. But the ones that are being created now, oh man, I've been watching tutorials on 808s and respaces lately, and some of these things have anywhere from like 3 to 6 voices. And I watched a video of this guy playing an 808 sound, bass sound for trap music, and it was the most like slippery, pitch shiftingest, like jumping all over the place, but like deep sounding sound. And at the bottom, of course, there's a sine wave, and it's definitely not it's definitely not coming out of some ancient synthesizer, drum synthesizer. It's way too complex to be coming out of just an ancient drum synthesizer. And then the way that people are writing bass lines now, that stuff's impossible with, you know, an old 808, an RD, or was it drum RD, or yeah, RD 808 thingy. My experience with a lot of old synthesizers has been that they need to be heavily processed to sound like anything other than like a quaint nostalgia sound. It's like, oh, that's nice. And it's weird because like the sound of a raw instrument it's almost just boring.
Yeah, it's gotten to that point, and like you're saying, in terms of like being able to have more voices in a sound, like polyphonic, electronic music is taken for granted to the point where once something becomes like monophonic, it's like it sounds like you're listening to like a PBS commercial or some shit. And like you know, somebody who is proficient in music theory and electronic music could make something, you know, listenable, but it's going to be really hard to compete with modern sensibilities of how sounds are constructed.
Yeah.
And I think also part of it is like there's lots of music that incorporates soundscapes in non-rhythmic patterns as like part of the aesthetic, which then people don't recognize as being there, as like effectively you're having two different things put together to make one thing in terms of like an arrhythmic soundscape can exist on its own, but people never really got into ambient music more than anything as like a novelty or like the background for a TV show or something. People aren't just listening to ambient music in their homes in general, unless it's like a white noise machine, or I guess it wouldn't even be white noise in that case. It would be like, you know, blue noise, or something that's like actually
That's 2 chirps in the last
tonic,
hour.
but not necessarily rhythmic. So that's where I'm like, it wouldn't be atonal. It could be, but generally, a lot of the soundscapes aren't necessarily like noise, which is where the noise genre.
Yeah.
I can't get with those people.
Well, it's really hard to have like polytonal music or polymodal music that isn't atonal, unless the sounds are synthetic. They have to be like completely synthetic to pull that off. Otherwise, there's just the kind of harmonic dissonance that emerges is kind of unbearable. Like, not just like, oh, what's that noise? It's like, oh, what's that noise? Fuck, I'm going to the other room, guys. I'll see you there. You know, and I mean, as we know, I think electronic music dances this really fine line of complex sounds, but really simple harmonic complexity. And even really jazzy jungle or house music where they do have complex chords and chord changes, they're really just vamping on like 4 chords at a time, and it's not really rising to the level of like jazz where the music itself is interdependent on the performance of the other musicians in the room in that moment. It's complex in structure and in theory, but it never really leaves the drawing board in that sense. And so to have that kind of music, the sounds actually, to pull it off, the sounds actually have to be complex. Like the tonality, the tonal profile, the timbre, the evolution of timbre as the music performs itself, because it's a computer. That's where the complexity comes in. Whereas in music that really showcases instrumental virtuosity, like progressive metal is all about guitar players and drummers and bass players and keyboard players just showing off. And what you find is the sounds that they're using are actually very simple. Like the bass in most progressive metal is actually very mid-forward because they want definition, because they've got a lot of slapping and tapping and other stuff. And similarly with guitar, the sounds aren't that complicated. They have a fair degree of seething distortion, but it's very defined. And a lot of that is because they're playing really intricate stuff. And so they can't make it a complex sound because they're not playing any note long enough for the sound to evolve. But at the same time, both of these kinds of music have a very high degree of like organization behind them, which pushes them to the extremes of their respective genres in a sense. Like neurofunk is even more restrictive in the kind of sounds and harmonic content it can actually get away with, because the sounds are so jarring and just kind of, I hate to borrow the term, brutal. But a lot of those sounds are real rough, real aggressive, real just abrasive. And so they can't really get too dissonant, because if you get too dissonant, then it all just collapses in on itself and it sounds like trash. And so like I've struggled with this for years, because like the when I do hear electronic music that's made by somebody who's applying really complex like chordal or harmonic theory, there's always this kind of it doesn't have the same kind of conversation that one gets with a room full of musicians who are performing together. It's more like a really complex inner dialogue. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's different, and I think it's harder to do. I think it's harder for that person, for that kind of composer, to exist, because there's so much feedback that happens within a group, the group dynamic. There's so much information being fed into each person in that moment, that one person creating all of that energy and generating all of those ideas and all of that interplay, I mean, that's like a peerless genius type of capability.
Well, and I think that's the difference between a writer and a player, which is where a lot of people can play, but they can't write for shit.
Oh, yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, definitely. Like, I've definitely heard plenty of music like that doesn't that does all the things. It's just the performance of the instruments is like really basic, like very simple, like needs a lot of extra time spent. And there's nothing wrong with it. Some of that music is great, actually. There's a lot of really, I think, like there's a channel that I've been listening to called Fluidified, and they've got, it's all like, I think they call it chill step. It's really simple stuff, but it's really calming. It's really good for late at night when I don't want loud, aggressive sounds, but I want deep, soothing bass. It's one of those genres where the vocals are pitched out of the out of the range of identifying, who's the singer. You can't even tell who the singer is. It's just a voice, like a voice coming from off in the distance type stuff. Like 3 a.m. music.
Yeah, in a lot of parties they would use that as like the
Time to leave.
or there was like one hardcore and one like chill room
Yeah.
if there was two rooms. So it's like, you know, you can go in there and people would like smoke cigarettes or whatever, and it's like you're not necessarily trying to dance, but it's
You could,
also sorry, go ahead.
oh, you could vibe, but you didn't have to get beat up by a speaker.
And there was enough bass to warrant being at a party where you're like, you couldn't do this at home, um, to that degree, but yeah, it's not gonna like make you go deaf being in a fucking chill room. And that's where like being able to go between rooms and like let the ringing die down.
Oh man.
You know.
Sometimes the chill rooms had like deeper bass than the main rooms.
Hmm.
Like I remember going to some of those chill rooms and like feeling like I was having an asthma attack. And now I know it's because the room was of a certain size. Well, the opening to the room was of a sufficiently small size that it was porting the entire room. It was turning into like a Helmholtz resonator, and nobody knew, or if they did know, they didn't say anything and didn't care. And had I known at the time, I probably would have been really excited to be like, "Oh, we're at a Helmholtz resonator, guys! Holy crap!" And then I would have tried to explain it to somebody, and they would have looked at me like I was like, "Why are you telling me science stuff at a rave?" Actually, no, if I'd have said that to you, you probably would be like, fuck yeah, dude.
Well, I was thinking about like because a lot of the raves were not in Indiana, you had to really be sober to get to them and get back safely. So it wasn't
Yeah.
really something that you could like participate in and get super fucked up anyway.
No, couldn't.
Because then like the people who they're obviously definitely people who were doing drugs, but they would then go to after parties and then
Yeah, the
end up
people,
missing work and shit.
or they
Like,
passed out in the back of my minivan. I don't know if I miss stopping at like a Denny's or a Waffle House at like 3 or 4 in the morning because I'm starving because I haven't eaten in 8 hours and I've been moving a lot for 8 hours. Need some water, but there's part of me that actually misses that kind of late night horrible for my body food experience. Like right now, as I think about raves, I mean, I probably won't even think about Denny's again. Here in 43 minutes, I probably won't think about Denny's again from like till I drive by. We don't even have a Denny's anymore.
nope.
So like
Strong.
until the next time I drive by a Denny's sign, that'll be the next time I think about it. But like Denny's, Waffle House, IHOP, any small town breakfast diner. Like I know it's fun. I guess. I guess it's fun to romanticize that stuff, but when I really think about it, that stuff is like the worst version of breakfast food that I can make myself.
Oh yeah, it's like
The eggs are like flat.
very
The
rare
bacon
that they
is.
would change the oil.
Oh god, the oil makes everything taste old.
Yep.
Like everything tastes old. The hash browns. The hash browns are only good because they can mash it down on that giant flat top griddle. I mean, I don't have a big enough griddle to make that kind of a hash brown. But they never make good pancakes. You got to go to like a fancy breakfast coffee shop to get really good pancakes. But yeah, like all the 24-hour breakfast serving places. That's like the absolute worst version of breakfast food. God, I ate so much of it too. I think hopefully I'm okay. Like, hopefully I didn't cross the threshold. I'm sure that there are people who ate Denny's or IHOP or Howard Johnson's breakfast every day for like years because they were on the road or something. I'm sure that there's a person like that. Hopefully they're like not.
Man,
Hopefully they don't have like cancer or something. But
yeah, it's like really difficult to look at the processed foods that are, in most of the fast foods anymore and not like be put off. It's like ever so often I'll go try fast food again, and it's like depending on the experience, it's like, oh, maybe I'll do it 2 or 3 times, but then inevitably somebody won't care, and you're gonna get some like terrible shit that's gonna be like, ah, this is not worth it.
man, I'm looking at Denny's website right now. I'm looking at their menu, and it's just a reminder that they've got a really good photographer, and they've got like a test kitchen. They can make really good food. Because this stuff like it looks like somebody actually cared when they made it.
Yeah.
But
If you can
that's
find a place that's like
actually
small enough for people to actually still give a shit, I think that's when you can go out to eat.
yeah.
Otherwise, it's like more than likely people aren't gonna give a fucking shit about what they're serving you.
But it's breakfast food. It's not like this is hard to make.
I mean, just in any food.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically breakfast food, it's hard to find people to give a shit. It's almost like the smaller the institution,
Yeah.
the more likely.
Well, there's Long Fei in town. They're fantastic. They make amazing Chinese food. Absolutely amazing. And if I were to just look at Denny's menu, though, like I would think that they were like the masters of breakfast food, but that's not the case. Every time that I've been there, the bacon is flat, the eggs are flat, the pancakes are either burnt or underdone. The only thing that I really like there is the hash browns, but that's because they've got that gigantic flat top that they can mash them down with.
Have you ever been to Le Peeps?
Le Peep?
Le Peeps?
Well, I don't think so.
Yeah, they're in Indianapolis. That's like, I guess you could call it a chain.
Let's see, where is
Because there's more than one, but yeah, that's where I'm like, some place like that is where you actually have to go for like breakfast food to not be some shit that you wouldn't make better at home. And it's like, even still, if you just took an extra second, it could still be as good as that, but like, it's not even in the same. Denny's is not even in the same ballpark as Le Peeps in terms of like the quality of the food.
I went to a really interesting breakfast place in Indianapolis. I don't know if it was Le Peeps. It probably was not Le Peeps.
You'd know because they make like huge pancakes.
Okay. No, the place that I went to did not have huge pancakes. About us home.
Because then I don't know if Perkins is still around, but that was like the less grungy version of Denny's, basically. In Let's see.
Yeah. Okay. This looks
No,
like
the one in Castleton's closed, so there's no more Perkins in Indianapolis.
copyright 2019 Le Peep. Okay, now I know where I'm gonna go when I go to Indy next time. They have a churro cake. That sounds freaking amazing. What the? Man, more than breakfast. Okay, menu. Take me to your menu. Okay.
Yeah, they have like 20 locations all over the country, and now, which is like, I guess the smallest a franchise could possibly get while still being a franchise.
Okay. Greenwood.
Which it makes it seem like they started in Indianapolis or Indy, because Indiana's the most number.
Oh man, that waffle looks delicious. Breakfast, lunch, brunch.
Yeah, I think they must have started in Indianapolis because it's been there for 30 years.
Oh, I get it. You can't even look at the menu until you select a specific Le Peep. That's kind of cool. Let's see. 45-year history. They were founded in Aspen, Colorado.
Mm.
It's a family affair. They expanded nationally through franchises, through licensing. Let's see. And then they apparently everything that's all of their modernization has happened within the last 20 years. Huh. That's cool.
Well, because I don't even think they have one in Colorado anymore. No, the closest one they have to Colorado is in Omaha. That's wild.
Let's see. Locations, catering contact, own a peep, how to own, vendors, team about. See what it costs to own a peep. I'm so hungry. I'm buying a franchise for a restaurant.
Talk about eyes bigger than the stomach, right?
Right? That's a really hardcore way to go about getting a pancake.
It's like the Lex Luthor way.
Yeah, it's like, why can't I get a good damn pancake? I'm just gonna buy a breakfast place and make them make a good pancake. Well, good. I'm glad that I rose to like a Lex Luthor level of solution to such a simple problem about finding a good pancake.
Well, and I guess on that note, it's like how many, you know, like how many Denny's are there in America
Let's find out.
left? It's like 1,700. So that's the ratio. You have to go 1,700 versus 20.
1,468 as of 2022.
It's like 850 to 1. Yeah. Jeez.
Wow. Oh no! As of this year, there are only 1,445 functioning Denny's as of March 16th this year. Nope, that's as of the 2022 finish. Yeah, so as of the beginning of March 2023,
Okay,
there
85.
were only 1,445 operating Denny's.
445, you said?
1,445 in the United
Oh,
States.
14. Okay.
That's as of that were functioning, operating as of the 1st of March as of this year. That's crazy.
Yeah. So for roughly one good restaurant, you have 60 shitty restaurants. Or breakfast, because that's where I'm like, I feel like that type of 1 to 60, 1 to 85 ratio is like fairly representative of how things work in this type of economy in terms of like, yeah, if you're trying to serve 60 times as many of the people as one place, you're not gonna have as good of ingredients, I guess inherently, but
There are only 45 Le Peeps. So
I mean open because that's where only 20 came up.
wait, oh yeah,
on the
so
map.
1, 2, 3. Shit, there's a boatload of them that are temporarily closed. Oh no, they're not opening either. Open for indoor dining. Not open for indoor dining. Oh shit, there's a bunch of them that are just not available to go in. You have to. They're only available for catering. Interesting. The majority of these are catering menu only. Yeah, there's only like 20 where you can go into them. So wait, 20 to 1445 ratio is
1 to 7.
that's 0.01384.
Wait, you say 1400 or 145?
1445.
Yeah, 1 to 70. Then Jesus.
No, it's even less. It's there are 0.0138 Le Peeps per Denny's.
That's like, yeah. And I guess to me, that's like,
That's capitalism for us.
that's capitalism, but it's also an explanation as to where you have all these people eating empty calories and not eating nutritious food and then overloading the healthcare system. And in the process, like that.
I mean, I didn't even know about
Denny's-
this Le Peeps place, so it's like, can you blame them? I also don't go to Denny's
Well,
a lot either.
That's
so.
also why, in terms of like the people that eat there aren't dying off at the same rate as the people that eat at the Denny's in
Yeah.
terms of like when you go to one, it's not going to kill you as quick as the other. So that's why I think in terms of like Denny's attempt to reproduce its model and like fill its room with people who were unhealthy effectively shortened its lifespan by overextending its model. And it's like, yeah, you can't.
So Denny's has over 70 locations across Canada. So low.
Yeah, that's super low.
That's so low.
Wow.
Denny's United States has covers 1,047 cities across 49 states. Denny's Canada across all whatever 5 or 6 provinces that they have locations that they have 70 total.
Tim Hortons has nearly 4,000 restaurants across Canada.
Yeah, but apparently Tim Hortons has like amazing coffee and really good pancakes and waffles and world-class maple syrup. It's actually maple syrup.
I've never heard a bad thing about a Tim Hortons.
Oh my god, I've
actually.
only heard reasons that make me want to go to Canada to go to a Hortons. Like, it's so fucked up. It's like this is the promised breakfast restaurant that we don't get to have, and we'll never know real urn style like drip coffee that just, it's like you don't even have to think about it because we're in America, and not even Starbucks apparently can compete with the Hortons urn of coffee that's been sitting there for who knows, like probably only 5 minutes, because apparently they can't keep them full because it's so damn good. Man, now I want to go to Canada. This is way too much effort for a pancake.
Okay, I bet there are protections on the food. So like, their version of a fast food restaurant is probably not going to be loaded with all the fucking preservatives that ours is.
Oh, man.
I don't even think they're necessarily. I don't know if Tim Hortons is necessarily fast food or considered that, but it's like, yeah, whatever they serve, it's not the equivalent of Dunkin' Donuts because they're not allowed to do the same shit that Dunkin' Donuts or fucking Denny's is allowed to do. So it's like, yeah, I can imagine like. It's not necessarily going to be the Le Peep level, but it's also, if there are the same sort of regulations on food that there are on healthcare, I do imagine that they're like Tim Hortons is probably going to be on average more healthy.
Man, right on their website of Denny's, London, Ontario, hand pressed 100% beef burgers. I have every expectation that that's actually like real. And man, it's the same pictures as Denny's American menu, but
Well, but then like, okay, I remember there was this period where everything was trying to be like Angus beef,
yeah,
and
Angus
I
beef.
don't know if Americans, well, part of it was they were allowed to lie, and if it wasn't like actually raised in uh like Scottish Highlands or whatever, they could still call it Angus if it came from fucking the cow lineage. So it's like that same shit happened with Kobe beef, and that's where I'm like, I don't know if Americans ever really got to taste the versions of the things that were being imitated and sold to them in a way that then made it not worth it to buy the imitation. So then they stuck with the low grade, and that's where I'm like, I know for a fact that like Cheesecake Factory was selling
Oh, so
fake Kobe beef.
Canada's meat regulation is very similar to the United States in terms of grading, but they have stricter laws and enforcement
Yeah,
of
figured.
handling. They don't allow they allow they don't allow as much fat content. They don't allow gray meat. So if once a meat goes gray, then that stuff has been exposed or contaminated. It looks like. You cannot get a medium burger at a restaurant. They will cook the hell out of it, apparently.
Oh wow,
Medium rare burgers
that's
are
crazy.
illegal at a restaurant.
Ha! That's funny.
So,
Wow,
um, so they
they're not
practice.
fucking
They're
around.
not. They got safe food for Canadian regulation. It's the SFCR guidance labeling requirements for meat and poultry products. It's just as dense as you know FDA policy. It looks like. Huh. Well, looks like Wendy's in Canada serves fresh, never frozen North American beef.
I
Oh
think they
no,
do that here
they do that
too.
in America too.
Yeah,
That's kind of cool.
which
That,
well,
that's
like I haven't been to
progressive.
Wendy's for a long time, but the last time I went, it was really good. So that's where I'm like,
Wendy's has
Wendy's was
always.
never bad.
The
I
only
just
problem with
think
Wendy's
there's
was there was that guy that owned a bunch of franchises of it, and he was a real shitbird and was what's God? He was like a what is he? I think he was like a presidential campaign contributor.
Dave Thomas.
No, not him. It
I
was
was gonna say.
no. It wasn't the Wendy's guy himself. It was there was a guy he owned a bunch of like Taco Bell's, Wendy's, and KFC franchises. Like one of like the big franchise holders of
Mm,
the Kentucky Hut um, microcosm. He's one of those people, and
mm.
but that was the only problem that I remember was that there was some stink about that, but it wasn't enough to get me to stop going to Wendy's because our Wendy's was not affiliated with that guy. When I say our Wendy's, I mean the one close to my house because I know that there's like I think there's like three of them or four of them in town.
Well, yeah, I think that was the issue with Wendy's is the consistency between locations is very inconsistent, or is not. There is no consistency between locations. So one place you might go get a fucking awesome burger and fresh fries, and the other one it might be like the the bun has like signs of falling somewhere and being picked up, and it's like pieces fell out of the bun, and
Yeah. No, no,
your
no.
burger's all in two
The
pieces, and
one
it's like,
on my end of town on Old State Road 37, that's like a good Wendy's. That's one of those. That's the place where the burgers are always fresh. The fries are, they're always good. The the frosty machine is never broken. The chicken is perfect. It's like I got
did you ever see the documentary about the McDonald's ice cream machine.
Oh God, no.
So there's a whole thing to the McDonald's ice cream machine in terms of like it wasn't, you know, obviously nobody thinks it's the people inside McDonald's fault, but it was literally something that they could not um get around because the faults that the machines were having, like the company that made the machines were like um making it impossible for them to figure out how to fix the machines without consulting them, so they'd have to pay the company to come out and fix it,
Oh
even if it
man.
was just like, oh, the machine overheated, so you just like hit this button and it resets. So they weren't like giving them the information to like solve minor problems. So that's why anytime you go to McDonald's, chances are the shit's gonna be down because they don't actually have access to um
The
the
right
error
stuff. Yeah.
codes, like the error
Man.
codes to figure out what's wrong with the machine to fix it. And most of the time it's something very simple.
Yeah.
And that's where like it became a thing. And that's why the machines at Wendy's are never broken, is because they don't use the same company. And it's like, you know, you may go to one and it may be broken like once in a blue moon, but it's not the same way as McDonald's, because it was literally like the company that was making the McDonald's ice cream machines was basically setting up McDonald's to fail in terms of being able to deliver that product without having to lean on them for an overpriced service,
Mm.
which is like where our economy is going at large. But you know,
Man.
they got around it by just not serving it.
Yeah.
That's what
I
happened.
I worked at rallies when I was a sophomore in high school, and every so often the milkshake machine would stop working, and they would just pour water through the system until it unclogged whatever froze in the line, because the system wasn't designed for the volume of utilization that occurred. Who knew that like people actually liked the shit out of Rally's milkshakes and would just, of course they would give you like 40 ounces of milkshake, but like those machines apparently weren't actually capable of handling that volume of utilization. But they would just rinse it out and then pour more stuff. And the only reason that they ever ran out, at least when I was there, was because they actually ran out of milkshake mix. Like they didn't have any more in the back because they would sell out, and they were waiting for the next day for the truck to show up with all the stuff. So I mean, I can totally imagine. I can totally see how like McDonald's, which has always tried to have like sophisticated delivery mechanisms for their product, it'd just be too complicated, and they wouldn't give anyone the tools. And now when like I went into a McDonald's and we ordered on a giant touchscreen that it was all smeared up with looked like boogers.
Oh God.
And
Oh
I'm looking at this thing, it's like I have to touch this thing and then I gotta eat food.
God.
Seriously? Okay, whatever. I guess when in Rome. I'm not sure how I feel about the ordering off of a giant TV screen. I guess it makes it more impersonal, so that when the person gives me the burger, it's like, hey, thanks for being the intermediary between the burger machine and my stomach. But really, like how much longer can fast food actually exist as we experienced it as kids? Because I don't think that thing. Like, there's still like a playground at the Ellettsville McDonald's, but I don't look inside it. I don't know how much it gets used. I'm sure it still gets used, otherwise they get rid of it. I have every expectation that COVID completely doused all interest in playgrounds, though. And ball pits were always nasty. I can't imagine
Oof.
that would have changed.
Oh my God.
That's like
Yeah.
not the kind of thing that
Oh my
changes.
God.
Ball pits are always going to be like, might as well be like a pathogen exchange pit.
Well, you give kids all that sugar, all that pizza, whatever. Somebody's gonna puke eventually.
Or piss or shit.
Or piss or shit.
Ugh.
But somebody's definitely puking, and nobody wants to be the one to like clean that shit up. So it ends up like crusting up, and yeah, it's like kids' places inevitably end up just gross. Because kids are gross.
Yeah, kids
And it's
are
like,
gross. But they're allowed to be gross.
yeah, because they're kids. But
Yeah.
it's like ultimately that's why you don't want large concentrations of gross beings making other things gross. And it's really hard for those spaces to be maintained. Well, it's not like adults don't get gross too, in terms of like it's different types of gross then, but it's like
Yeah, but adults are generally tasked with cleaning up after themselves. And when teenagers are tasked with cleaning up after really young kids, I mean, that's like where shortcuts get taken.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh. Ugh.
Yeah, I feel like the cleanliness ebbs and flows, where there was this period where everybody was obsessed with like hand sanitizer,
Yeah.
and then it like swung back the other direction, where it was like don't take showers for weeks.
Ugh.
And then you get the people like what's her name, Dax Shepard, and
Veronica Mars.
yeah, Kristen Bell. Now all I can think of is like dirty people. Like her name in my mind is first dirty person that probably smells like fucking leftover keg, and then it's like Kristen Bell, because her and Dax talking about how they don't like shower every day and don't make their kids shower every day. It's like that shit overrides like your actual name, because then it's like same thing with Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher. It's like, oh, you don't shower? Like all this wealth is for nothing apparently. If you like
Forget to
don't
bathe.
wash your ass, you don't wash your ass at least once a day, if not twice a day, you're not civilized. In modern times with running water, I don't give a fuck how much money that person has. They're not washing every day. It's like they might as well be a fucking monkey about to throw some shit to me, because that's where I'm like,
Yeah, I mean,
Kristen Bell
it's
and
really
Dax Shepard
easy
admitting that.
It's really easy to install a bidet and have like have a butt shower like right next to the can. It's so easy. It takes like 5 fucking minutes,
God.
and then you just have a bidet on a sprayer. You can use it to clean the toilet. It takes 5 minutes to install. I think they maybe cost like $30. Here, I'm gonna look this up now because I'm curious. Menards. Let's see. Menards has a bidet for $35. 39 is the one that we have. They go up from there up to like hundreds of dollars. 57, 199, $800. Oh, that's an entire toilet with a bidet. Yeah, from like 35 to $40, you can get a bidet that like allows you to clean the ass like instantly. Yeah. It can't be that. Yeah.
Also, the whole like selling wet wipe shit is a scam, in terms of like we have sinks, we have toilet paper. You can wet the toilet paper. It's like so easy in modern times to like make your own wet wipe. It's like capitalism has really distorted people's notions of like problem solving, in terms of, oh, if toilet paper is already able to be flushed / biodegradable, adding water to it shouldn't.
So
Like, considering it goes in water, that shouldn't make it less biodegradable. So, yeah, I don't know, man.
What did what did humans do before the invention of toilet paper?
There's lots of things. There's sticks. There's leaves.
Okay.
Well, and it's funny. I just happened to watch a documentary on this in terms of like it was like a 15-minute one, but toilet paper is a very recent phenomenon, and in terms of like human history, and like the companies that we have today basically were the first ones to come up, and like Scott is one of the oldest toilet paper companies. Charmin's fairly old. Some of the older ones failed off, but effectively what happened was they weren't even allowed to promote toilet paper in advertisements because it was so uncouth up until the 70s. So like before the 70s, like not only would you not see advertisements for it, they called it like sanitary paper, I think, or I think that was in it. Whatever it wasn't toilet paper. And then only recently, in terms of like the last 50 years, has there been like this ubiquity of toilet paper being present in society, but also being acknowledged as something, because people want to act like it didn't exist.
So the first perforated toilet paper rolls were introduced in 1890, but it wasn't
not that old.
It wasn't until 1930 that toilet paper was finally manufactured splinter-free.
Yeah, and it's funny because the whole thing about being splinter free it was just like a sales gimmick to like set one apart from the other, to make it like there was no real report of like splinters in toilet paper. But when they started being like, ours is splinter free, like you had to say it, otherwise people would assume your shit had splinters in it. So that's where it was like the gimmick of selling it was, the first one was like the splinter free thing, and then it became like, once they started allowing the discussion of the sanitary products on television, that's when it started to really, you started seeing like the commercials in the early 80s. And that's like, our generation grew up with toilet paper commercials, so we thought it was ubiquitous, whereas in reality it's like just as recent as like diamond rings in marriage. And that's where it's like these things that are being presented to us as tradition, and further they make it seem like if people aren't using their toilet paper, it's like, oh, these societies use their hands. Fucking bullshit.
Holy cow, the Chinese have been using cleansing papers since the 6th century.
Yeah.
What the
and before toilet paper, Americans were using newspaper generally, and that's where it's like you go from like leaves and sticks to newspaper to toilet paper in America, whereas like everywhere else you still get like other forms of like cleaning, and it's not just the fucking hand. It's like the idea that you go from toilet paper to your hand is just another example of American lack of creativity in terms of like, if you run out of toilet paper, that shouldn't be the end of like your capacity to clean. It's just like, oh, got to use something else. And that's where this notion of like toilet paper being the end all be all is a very recent.
They don't know how to use the 3 shells.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, man, China was producing toilet paper in the 1400s. What the fuck? 400 years later in the United States, hey guys, we've got toilet paper finally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of like inventions, cloth is like way easier to obtain in certain ways than paper. Like, as
China kind of invented paper, so.
Well, of course, but I mean, in terms of like,
it makes sense that they would have arrived at toilet paper. You know,
if you're like killing an animal and stretching out his skin, and like that would be easier than industrial production of paper
Oh yeah, yeah,
in terms of like access. Whereas like on a small scale, people can still obviously make paper, but as far as like what a society in the like versioning stages is going to do quicker, it's going to be way easier to hit the like, oh, dry out the fucking animal skin and use that instead of like getting to a point where we're making paper like for everybody. And it's not to say that they wouldn't make the paper at large, but it's just like realistically, like
I'm trying to imagine
the,
someone grabbing the shotgun so they can go shoot a rabbit because they have to take a shit.
yeah. But in that, I wouldn't imagine like somebody using one thing for like recording is then going to use that same thing for getting rid of fecal matter. Like,
Yeah.
it's not really like if I'm using one thing for like recording history or recording like ideas, that's not going to be my natural inclination for the thing to clean my ass. I would assume. Like, maybe somebody out there was like, this thing works for both. And
Oh, I'm
like,
sure that some
that
like
conclusion.
general, when they sacked like a library, they found some stack of scrolls and said, "Oh yeah, this is their history, guys. Let's wipe our asses." I'm pretty sure that's how a lot of history was lost, because that's like totally some barbarian warlord type shit. It's like, oh, their entire recorded history. Let's defile it,
Yeah.
and you know, history is like recorded more defiling of history than I guess we've lost more history than to defilers of history than we realize. Probably a lot more than we realize.
Oh, for sure. I mean, well, I guess it's like, how would you know until it was recorded?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, you know, future anthropologists could be looking for signs of poo smearing, but I think that would just get written into the geological record as
well,
like,
and this is where whitewashing in itself is like a funny attempt at destroying history that ended up preserving it. So it's like, you know, those successful attempts in contrast with the unsuccessful attempts at destroying history is like, you know, obviously the successful ones we don't know about. So that's where there's this, because what makes me think of that is like, I recently saw a post where somebody was like talking about the number of illegal streams that happen. And it's like, how the fuck do you know how many illegal streams happen? Like, they don't keep count and don't post the count on the fucking pirate sites. So like, the notion of somebody saying some shit like that is so complete. It's just a made up bullshit that they don't think people will call them on. Where it's like the manipulation of facts and the manipulation of history is like so constant. And I think we've gotten to a point as people where we're like aware of it. So,
well, I mean, obviously
there's-
AI told them how many times the illegal streams were happening. I mean, that's the only way to explain any of this stuff that doesn't have any actual factual data behind it. AI came up with this number. AI
Well,
came with
and
this
it's like,
quote.
we just got it. I think we are getting better, but in general, at like calling out that bullshit in
Yeah.
terms of like, you can't do that. Or like, I've gotten increasingly unable to like not call my dad out when he makes a bad analogy. And it's like, so many Americans will make bad analogies because they didn't understand compare and contrast, and then their professor or their teachers didn't understand it enough to call them out on it. So now I think we're at a point where it's like, we can't allow the bad analogies and the bad comparisons to persist, because I think that's fundamentally holding Americans back from understanding.
Yeah, but we've got to let everyone have their truth.
But do we?
No,
I don't
God,
think
no.
we do.
I don't think we should. I think it's like the most dangerous thing that we've ever allowed. Like, everyone can have their truth on the internet. We've all got to respect it. There was a time when people would, before the internet, and I'm pretty sure it happened before the internet, because I don't remember this stuff happening on bulletin boards or like IRC or BBSs. but maybe it did happen. I just was too young to see it. But when people tried to pull bullshit, like, they got ostracized. I remember seeing, like, as a teenager, when people were like, shitbirds, they weren't invited to the party. They weren't asked to come hang out at the lake or go to a quarry or something like that. Now people just act like idiots on the internet, and I wonder, do they even have any real social interaction? Or maybe they just all found each other.
Not enough hugs.
Not enough hugs. Maybe they had too many cookies.
I feel like people supplement hugs with cookies.
That's probably true. Oh man, what's the cookie to hug index ratio? Like, I mean, how many cookies does one have to eat to feel like they got like one hug, like the whole bag?
Exceptional radio.
Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional radio.